John Cumbler is an environmental historian whose studies explore the human impact on the natural world over long periods of time. He taught for most of his life at the University of Louisville, Kentucky, but he now lives on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and the most recent of his 7 books is a 400-year environmental history of Cape Cod. He's also an historian of social movements, from the abolitionists to the feminists and the activists now working for other social and environmental rights. John Cumbler tells stories about how we've done things wrong, and also about how we've done things right. This is a history we really need to know.
I didn't start academically as an environmentalist. I started really as a labor social historian. But because I was an avid, since a little teeny kid, fisherman and I guess you would call outdoors kind of kid, I became more and more involved in the concerns over the environment and politically. And then increasingly I thought, what can I bring to the environmental movement besides, my body and demonstrations and things? And it seems to me my historical skills, and that's what got me into environmental history.
And then you've done a very extensive study of Cape Cod over a period of 400 years. Tell me what you've learned from that, or maybe tell me a bit about the story of how the Cape has evolved over those 400 years.
I picked the Cape partly because I live there and I love it, but also because it's a very fragile piece of land. It's a sand spit that was left by the glacier. So I think it gives us because it's such a delicate piece of land and it's a very contained piece of land, it sort of becomes a microcosm that we can see what's happening, and we'll have to extrapolate from it, but I do think it helps tell a tale that's very important. So it starts with a very new piece of land. I mean, it was basically deposited by the glacier, and within a few hundred years was colonized by plants and sea animals, and then marshes developed. So that all happened fairly quickly by geological terms. And humans arrived, Native Americans, fairly early on as well. But the nature of the estuaries, all estuaries are incredibly prolific, so it provided a good place for people to live. I'm a historian, so you have to bear with me. I became a historian, partly, to be honest, because it was easy for me, but partly I became a historian because when I was growing up, when I was in college, the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement was ongoing, and the Vietnam War was, I'll go back, civil rights. When I went to Mississippi to do voter registration, one of the things we did is we set up freedom schools to teach people the history of black struggle in this country. I mean, we weren't paid to do that. The kids that came to those schools weren't paid to, they didn't get credit for it. They did it because they believed they had to know their history in order to affect their present. One of the things I'm involved in is trying to shut down a nuclear power plant in Plymouth, Massachusetts. The plant's 40 years old. It has all kinds of problems. The design is the same design as the one in Japan, and we think it should be shut down. They don't have the fuel rods aren't well protected and are in a dangerous place and everything. And when we point out the fact that this plant is on the coast and it's the same design as the Fukushima plant, they go, well, that's Japan and that was an earthquake. And I, as a historian, say, yes, but in 1635, there was a hurricane that created a storm surge that drove 20-foot waves inland, or exactly where that plant is. If you're a historian, you know things like that.
John Cumbler, writes one of his students, is talented, committed, fiery, brave, and humble. We interviewed him in Eugene, Oregon, where he delivered a keynote address to the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference, as did I. We interviewed several other presenters at that conference: butterfly expert, naturalist, and author Robert Michael Pyle, musician and composer Eugene Friesen, and Mary Wood, the legal scholar whose work led to the climate change lawsuit by 21 young Americans against their own government. Watch for those interviews later in 2017. For The Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron.